Hi, and welcome to my presentation on net neutrality in the open internet order. I'd like to begin by briefly outlining the topics I will be covering in this presentation. What is net neutrality? What is the open internet order? The history of net neutrality in the open internet order. Then we will discuss the recent repeal of net neutrality by taking a look at its supporters and its detractors. We will also cover what the repeal means for consumers and what the repeal means for businesses. At the end of the presentation, I will wrap it up with a couple of questions to help stimulate class discussion. So what is net neutrality? Net neutrality is the concept that internet service providers should treat all internet traffic more or less the same on their network. More simply stated, this means that internet service providers should not discriminate against how broadband services are used. They should not be able to block customers from seeing content on the web and should not throttle or slow data speeds from certain sites or apps. They also can't make paid prioritization deals with companies to create fast lanes to move data for one company more quickly than they do for others. This helps create an even playing field among content providers, because internet service providers cannot choose which services are successful in reaching subscribers. The comic on the right is an easy way to think of net neutrality. The little guys, or your startups or small businesses, have the same competing power as the big guys do. The internet lanes are all equal. Everyone can travel at their own pace, and no one is granted an unfair easy pass. The FCC is supposed to be governing these rules, and for now, they're letting them play nice. So what is the Open Internet Order? The Open Internet Order was adopted by the Federal Communications Commission on February 26, 2015. This order dealt with the matter of protecting and promoting an open internet by establishing strong rules that protect customers from past and future tactics that threaten the open internet. Specifically, it officially banned internet service providers from blocking and throttling data, from accepting payment, monetary or otherwise, to organize their networks in a way that favors specific content, applications, services, or devices, and from taking an action that prevents users from accessing content online. This is what we would refer to as the net neutrality laws that we know today. Prior to these rules existing, nothing was stopping internet service providers from slowing down data transferred from content providers. In 2013, Comcast internet customers began seeing a drop in the quality of Netflix streaming services. An investigation found that internet service providers, in addition to Comcast, were letting Netflix traffic bottleneck at the connection between Netflix bandwidth provider and the internet service provider. Eventually, Netflix and Comcast reached a deal where Netflix essentially paid for Comcast to end the slowdown. Netflix eventually had to do the same things with Verizon and AT&T. So a brief history of net neutrality in the open internet order. Net neutrality has been a controversial issue which has been debated extensively over the last 20 years or so. To understand its evolution, we must look back to the early days of the internet. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 was the first major overhaul of the Communications Act of 1934. The objective of this law was to open telecommunication markets up to competition by removing regulatory barriers to entry and creating a distinction between telecommunication services that are regulated as utilities and other information services that are not. In 2015, the FCC classified cable and wireline internet services as information services, placing them beyond the reach of the Communications Act of 1934. Under this decision, internet services were not considered a utility, and internet service providers could charge for their services as they pleased. In 2008, two public interest groups investigated and filed complaints with the FCC, claiming that some internet service providers were interfering with customers' use of peer-to-peer software. As a result, the FCC required Comcast to disclose information about its network management practices, submit a plan for moving to non-discriminatory management practices, and disclose the terms of its new practices, including plans that would limit customers' access to bandwidth. In 2010, broadband access to the Internet was reclassified as a telecommunications service subject to Title II Common Carrier Regulations under the Communications Act of 1934. Subsequently, the FCC passed the Open Internet Order to encourage the deployment on a reasonable and timely basis of advanced telecommunication capability to all Americans. The 2015 Open Internet Order, the 2015 Open Internet Order reestablished the Open Internet rules as I described in my earlier slides and became known as net neutrality laws. This past December, the Open Internet Order and net neutrality was repealed by the FCC, and progress to begin rolling back net neutrality will begin this week. So let's talk about the repealing of net neutrality. Net neutrality has been a hot topic of conversation in our political stratosphere for several years now. In December, members of the FCC voted 3-2 in favor of repealing net neutrality. This week, the repeal of net neutrality goes into effect. To better understand what is going on and what we can expect to happen, let's take a deeper dive into the specifics of net neutrality and how its repeal will affect our nation in the years to come. Companies like LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, Spotify, and Reddit, along with others not shown here, such as Netflix, have all been supporters of net neutrality. These internet content providers have offerings that take up a lot more bandwidth than other services such as email. Think of watching your favorite show on Netflix, the video of your niece your sister just posted to Facebook, or the YouTube videos posted to the various modules for this class. All of these services take up more bandwidth to view than it does to check your email. Under net neutrality protections adopted in 2015, internet service providers cannot charge these companies extra for delivering this large amount of data to our phones, TVs, and computers. Internet service providers, on the other hand, such as Comcast, Verizon, and others pictured here, have all come out in opposition of net neutrality. Without net neutrality regulations, these internet service providers have the ability to charge content providers like Netflix, Facebook, and Google more money for services using up more bandwidth. The December 14, 2017 vote to repeal net neutrality means internet service providers can charge these companies more money to deliver content, or else slow down the delivery of these services to consumers. So what does the end of net neutrality mean for individual consumers like you and me? The end of net neutrality means internet service providers can now charge consumers more money for services they already subscribe to. For example, you may expect to pay your normal Netflix subscription fee, along with a fee from your internet service provider for delivery of Netflix services. It could also mean that you should expect to pay more for using social media apps. Some believe it may also be possible for your internet service provider to censor content. So if you're feeling like ordering a pizza for dinner and you try to visit Dewey's Pizza online, it may direct you to Domino's website instead because they have a special arrangement in place, rerouting traffic to the preferred provider. Although this hardly seems fair to consumers, some argue that users can now abandon pricey standard data plans in favor of paying only for the services they use. In other words, if you only use social media apps on your phone, you may not want to pay for the ability to stream video from Netflix, which could in turn lower the charge you pay for data services. The FCC and current administration believes rolling back net neutrality regulations will also force internet service providers to be more transparent with their customers and disclose to customers what they are being charged for. But even in the face of the internet service provider transparency argument, The end of net neutrality means disadvantages for a large number of Americans. In a 2016 broadband report by the FCC, it was reported that nearly 2/3 of the American population live in areas that only have one internet service provider to choose from when considering high-speed internet options. If internet service providers choose to begin blocking content, slowing download speeds, or charging customers more as a result of the repeal of net neutrality, these Americans will have a tough decision to make. Do they pay more for internet services, or do they go without internet altogether? This could leave these Americans at a disadvantage to information that we all use and share on the internet. So what does the end of net neutrality mean for businesses? As we just learned, the revival of previously banned unfair practices by internet service providers is a very real possibility. All of this may mean running a startup or small business is about to get a lot more difficult. With the possibility of paid prioritization on the horizon, large businesses and corporations with deep pockets will have the opportunity to pay for fast lane data transfer, giving them special treatment over small businesses. Startups and small businesses would find this challenging because they would inevitably lose traffic due to long load times, and it is possible that some internet service providers may block traffic to these sites altogether. Even if larger startups decide to pay more for higher speeds, they will likely end up needing to pass those costs along to their customers, which would make it even harder for them to compete with bigger payers who can afford lower prices. As a result, we could see a decline in innovation, as a great deal of our innovation in the United States is attributed to startups. In the wake of all this turmoil, internet service providers maintain the stance that they are committed to being fair and keeping a level playing field. Unfortunately, the lack of competition in some markets where there are only one or two internet service providers means there is little standing in the way of unfair business practices that favor larger companies. We will just have to wait and see what happens in the months ahead. So to wrap up, a couple of questions we can use for our discussion. How do you think the recent repeal of net neutrality will affect your company? How do you think you will be personally affected by the repeal of net neutrality? Are you concerned about increases in your internet service provider bills, or increases in prices for subscription services such as Netflix and Spotify? What is your stance on the issue? Do you think internet service providers should be regulated? Do you believe it when internet service providers claim they will not slow down speeds or block content following the rollback of net neutrality regulations? I hope you've enjoyed my presentation, and I'm looking forward to reading through all of your comments throughout the week. Thanks, everyone.